All right, so this is actually, God damn. All right, this was originally 2 talks. It is still pretty much 2 talks, but a lot of what was covered earlier today really covers, so I can focus on what I really want to focus on, which is democratic governance. And so, yeah. Now, yeah, that was the slide for that. So let's start at the 2008 crash. I used to call myself fiscally conservative because, well, when I was a kid, I would hear about the economy, about us going into debt, about the inflationary spiral that we might happen, that really, it seemed like nobody knew how to fix it. And, you know, we got out of it, we recovered, but conservatives have a completely different view of how the economy works. And I think it's important that we meet them there. So the issue is that we have to spend first. We have to guarantee UBI, but many of our returns come many decades, even like almost centuries if you want to think about the epigenetic code of like not growing up with trauma and the way that changes people. So okay, so these are going to be gross estimates. These are not the actual net costs where, you know, we can easily, this is going to be, our actual costs are going to be half to much less, but this is going to be what politicians see. So what politicians see and what we have to guarantee, for instance, in the United States, is $4 trillion. And that's a lot of money. I mean, the issue is if you're trying to tax to gain basically what is 100% of 2021 tax revenue and 70% of what spending was, that is politically difficult, all right? We know about this. This is 85% of spending in Australia. This is 2.1 times the budget in New York. This is 3 times the budget in Los Angeles. And it's 1.6 times the budget in California. So what people want to know, I mean, they get having money. I think that's the easy argument. The hard argument is telling them the economy won't crumble or inflate until UBI is worth nothing. So the best we've done so far is about Andrew Yang's 10% VAT. I've done the math. But UBI isn't a math equation, but it's how we've let it be treated. The price tag debate is the UBI debate, I believe. I believe that is what is going to hang up UBI until we answer why we don't have issues with inflation and responsible spending. So the deficit myth has persisted in public consciousness despite the events of August 15th, 1971, perhaps one of the most important dates in the last century, besides, you know, World War II. And so Nixon took us off of Bretton Woods. He took us off of the gold standard. Now we can issue money as we need. So yet we still rely on a centuries-old game, the pay-for game. And this holds back legislation because we're not only doing the laws, we are also doing the tax bills at the same time. So fiat is different, and yet we still try not to increase the deficit at any costs. And when we let conservatives argue about the $24 trillion bill that we have to pay, austerity evangelists likened it to $70,000 per American, plus interest over time. How can we afford UBI or anything when we're all in so much debt, is what we're asked by conservatives. And we try to come at this from the frame of responsible spending. And the issue is that it's too complicated. As was said yesterday, keep it simple, stupid. So this has been our responses. It's been the wealthy haven't paid their fair share. Taxes will be raised. We'll pay for it. And the worst, paying down the deficit is an investment in our future. That was said by Bill Clinton. The issue is that currency must exist before it can be taxed. So the private savings is equal to the public government debt plus or minus the foreign sector. So this is a graph, and you see it always evens out to 0. And if we overlay the times of economic recession, we see reducing the deficit, recession, reducing deficit spending, recession. It goes on and on and on. So when we approach this from an issue of not touching the deficit, we are looking at completely the wrong thing, because issuing currency is providing credit in the economy, and UBI is giving credit to people. So taxation is deletion, which means that the Joker basically has paid more in federal taxes than Batman has. So this is basically, oh no. So basically when we reduce deficit spending, we reduce the amount that's available for households, and we end up with recessions. All right, so this has been explained in previous talks, but currently we match treasuries by deficit, or we match deficit spending with treasuries, which is just a policy choice. The blue would be taxing, and the yellow would be the extra spent. But we can change this policy choice. Okay, so this is the Stephanie Kelton's sort of. We're taking green dollars out of the economy when we issue treasuries, and we deficit spend, and we match them with treasury bills, and then we reprint them in the future. And so, Alan Greenspan, there's nothing to stop us from creating as much credit as we want. The issue is making sure the resources are there. So, I say that as activists, our words matter. We call it the debt. We call it deficit. But are you really in debt if you can just issue the currency out of thin air? If it is something that, if it's just a computer program that issues it at will, I don't believe that we should call that debt. And I don't believe that we should call something that is so crucial to the economy the deficit. Think of where that word comes from. It comes from deficient. And nobody wants to think of the economy or a government as deficient. So, other words, because these are treasuries. These are treasury-backed securities. So what do we call it? The treasury balance, the reserve balance, the public trust, anything else. We have to change our words so that people understand that we are not in debt as a household or a business can be in debt. So these are much more important metrics. You could call it the treficit if you want to be fun, because it sounds like deficit, but it is a treasury deficit. So well-being, employment, all those. This is not only not true, it is awful politics, because the Democrats are, instead of funding the programs that we need to fund, they're focusing on the deficit. Instead of creating supply, they are focusing on the deficit. So unemployment is 9 to 16 times worse than inflation. And basically, when you increase unemployment by 1%, you get 9 to 16 times more hospital visits for stress-related illnesses than inflation. And so the focus on inflation, in being completely fine with creating, the Fed is looking at 4 to 10% unemployment. And this can cause instability, and it will cause unrest, and it will cause extremism and division. So, and inflation is just the cost of living. So we can focus on reducing the cost of living, and with policies like this. But just as examples, and there are many more policies available, but when we focus on just the deficit, and we don't focus on other metrics and about creating productive things, we can't pass this legislation. So we need deficits. We need treficits, the treasury deficits. We need the public balance. So, so yes, UBI is providing credit to people. So we focus on it from that angle, from providing credit, from accessing, from allowing people to access it and access the resources they need. Because when they can access the resources they need, you run the economy much faster. Okay. So the last thing is about this subject is we need to pin it to inflation, because it will become worth less over time, just like the minimum wages. And instead of having to fight every 10 years to raise it, we need to focus on not $1,000, but 1,000 real dollars. so we can fight once and be done with it. So fiat currency is flexible currency, and the inflation is not directly linked to the aggregate money supply. This myth has been persistent and is constantly on conservative news, but it has been debunked. And so if we take this as a practical example, we look at the supply-driven contribution versus the demand-driven contribution of inflation. So during the pandemic, we demanded that everyone stay unemployed, and so we increased supply-side inflation. In our fear to print money, we created inflation. So you require one of these circumstances for hyperinflation. The economy is not a bubble. And you will not end up with a spiral of debt if you print. So we focus on budget analysis, not other analysis. So the euro is dependent on the European Central Bank. So those countries are not able to issue their own currencies. And when you have to get when you have to get returns over time to pay off your loans, and because you can't issue currency, you are at increased risk of default. And so then the worse you are off financially, the higher the rates are, and the more it costs you. And so business interests become the public interest. Everything has to go to looking at what will be provided. So now we're looking at complementary currencies. And throughout time, communities have seen that we need to provide credit within the economy. So complementary currencies allow the communities that have the most ability to know what their population needs to issue, to provide credit in the economy, and then back it with a tax. This is bringing monetary sovereignty to local communities. It reduced the cost of borrowing. It's not a magical, fix to pay for everything. You have to get foreign. You still have to buy federal currency to get things from the rest of the economy. But and so in the last session, Belahavani, he talked about moving to a more resilient economy by creating a polyculture of economy based on the blockchain. Now, we used to think that the internet would save us, but now we're pretty sure it's going to kill us all. So, and this was back in the time when it was mostly run on university computers by university students with unique accounts, just looking for truth. But the internet has been corrupted by advertising. It's been corrupted by the need to make money constantly. And advertising is paid at a rate of 1/10 the amount of the average wage. They make about $2 off of your attention. It's exploitative, and so so we need to focus on these are the values that have driven, not these ones. So. Okay, so Web3 is really just a secure consensus for computers. It's not a foundation of democracy. We have secure digital voting now as proof of concept by DAOs, but it is not necessarily a democracy. They're backed by VCs, and they have business interests. So we need to look at better forms of democracy for reducing the cost of or making it easier for local communities to issue currency, because the biggest issue to complementary currencies has been the cost of issuing a physical bill and a physical coin. And now we can move beyond that. So, democracy 3.0, this is just a joke, but we need to, I don't know what democracy 2.0 is, but if you could help me, it would make it very cool. So Facebook is developing an AI to try to figure out disinformation, to combat a lack of consensus. But I don't think the solution is AI. It's IA, information architecture. It's making sure that the systems are in place to easily access the claims that are made on information sharing sites. So when you go to a Wikipedia article, you don't really look. There are citations, but you can't look at the exact place that a claim is made. You don't see the discussion on every single claim. It's broken down into one massive talk page for one massive subject. And there are a lot of ways to move beyond to to better forms. So I tried to create a tenant site. There's not really a platform for democracy, but the opportunity here is to move towards better forms of creating consensus by using verified identities with privacy protocols like Bright ID is doing, like Ethereum is doing, and building better information architectures around it, funding the people who are writing the, who are communally writing the legislation, and you create community consensus on legislation, because it's not right that people are, that votes are not, are split up. It's not right that, that your interests that you have the greatest desire for is suppressed by an apathetic majority. We have one vote, one person, one vote. It's time we move towards one person, one vote, on average, weighed for what you need. And we can do this with blockchain. We can, and proof of stake is basically bonds. It's basically a way to stabilize the currency while also securing the currency. And analytics are the backbone of this, making sure that these decisions are not divisive. And so this is owning our currency instead of just having our currency. So in conclusion, I think this is a much better way to create a to issue currency, because it reduces risk, it reduces the cost of borrowing, it allows us to free up our resources. We have to use these new tools at our disposal to reduce our costs, because we can and we must create an accessible society. And that's actually the link, society.rehab. So.
Okay, so we've got a question from Michael.
Yeah.
And then what I'll get you to do, Kai.
Yes. Hello?
Yeah, and then come back to I'll just do it. I'll get you to repeat the question when you answer it.
Of course.
Okay, thanks. And at that mic, the one on the table.
All right.
Lots of stuff there, which I'd love to have a chat to you about
Yes.
later. But one of the things that you mentioned was about characterising debt.
Yes.
Well, way in the past, my background was in accounting, and on the right-hand side of the balance sheet, you have debt, but you also have equity. So if we think about the amount of money that is on issue in the balance sheet of the central bank, at the moment it's all classed as debt. But we just have to rename it equity, because it never has to be repaid, and it represents the claim of us collectively on all of the resources of society, just like equity is a claim on the resources in a company.
Yes.
So equity is what it is.
Yeah. Could I get the slides still up? Zoe?
It might take, we've only got a couple minutes.
Yes. Scott?
Yeah, I guess that
Do you want to give a response? Or?
Oh yeah. It is. I mean, we are owners in our communities. We are owners in our states. It is only right that we have the ability to really control where resources go, and that's by controlling where credit goes. It's one of the most important, that is the most important power a democracy can have, is to have a sovereign currency.
So my question is, I'm curious am I understanding correctly that you're working on a new blockchain project, or is that what you're doing?
It is. It doesn't necessarily need to be blockchain. Blockchain is just it's a great way to secure things,
Right.
and it does create a lot of opportunities for really creating barriers against creating hierarchy within a democracy, because when you run everything via the consensus of everyone involved, and you can weigh it even by if you have an issue in a certain location that most affects the people at that location, you can distribute voting power around that location, because it affects the people at the center the most. So we can move to much more flexible forms of democracy.
Yeah. So I'm curious. Are you familiar with the existing projects like Intercoin is one of those looking at issuing currency at the local level and then having those interact with each other. And I mean, you did mention Bright AD, so I know you're familiar with Mana on that project, and I'm sure since you mentioned Ethereum, I think you're knowledgeable of the UBI coin that Proof of Humanity, is working on. And so, I'm curious, have you been in communication with any of these other projects?
Yeah. So,
are you looking to build what are you looking to build? Like, what is what you pointed to again that you're doing?
Yeah, so one of the weird things about Mana is that it's extremely undemocratic, because when you make a vote, you stake your currency on that vote. You have to pay basically to vote. This is not how we should be running our democracies. And so a lot of a lot of the people running these are very much looking at from a business point of view of, we need to get funding for it, we need to issue it. But the funding should be coming from taxes. It should be coming from resources that are denominated in that currency, from allowing people to buy real resources or to pay their taxes in that currency. And that creates the backing for it. And it's not like we need, there's a lot of debate about the models, the economic models that we should be running. Debt-free money or Treasury-backed money, modern monetary theory. The thing is that I think it's time that we start experimenting, because regardless of if communities make the optimal choice of how to issue money, there will be more credit available within these local economies, and it will help the economy. And we get analytics baked into the platform. We see how the economic effects of this, and we can create all sorts of new things based on historical forms of complementary currency, like time banking, like stamp script, where it would lose value every time it was exchanged, or company script, which would sometimes lose value over the month, or would demurrage, and it would. And that encourages exchange of that economy, and you'd see it flow much faster through the economy and reduce inequality. So we have options, and it's time we experiment. And it's time, instead of debating what's going to work best, it's time we run these pilots. It's time, and we figure out through actual knowledge and not just hypotheticals and equations.
Thank you, Pat. I'm going to get you to come here because no one can hear you online.
Oh, okay. I thought I was being loud enough.
I think we've got 2 more minutes left, so I'm just going to ask you, I'm really interested in what you said about your origins as what you call a fiscal conservative, and wondering what prompted your journey from that to where you are now, and this kind of spending first approach that you brought up front. So do you have thoughts on how we can speak to folks and the kind of ideas that we need to help shift people from that fiscal conservatism towards where we might like to see them go?
Of course. So basically, the fiscal conservative idea is very much Austrian economics, where it's like money is like fixed. We only have a certain amount of it, and so we need to tax and borrow. And so we really need to move beyond this. That's why I say we need to move beyond this word of debt for government debt, for sovereign currency issuing debt. It's really just, like I said, it's the reserve balance. We could call it the treasury balance. Anything else. Because when we speak of it as debt and deficient, people don't want debt. They don't want a deficient government. And so it's really about moving and saying, no, this is the amount of currency that's available in the economy. And when we make it more available, then we can let the market work better. Because when money is actually available, people can buy they buy better resources. They're able to take care of themselves. And we see just better economic use when we have credit available, and that's what currency issuance is. And it's time we stop calling currency issuance debt. Yeah?
Is there enough time for another comment or not?
If we can get a 15-second question and a 1-minute response, we have time. And if you want to yell it out, I'll repeat it back.
Okay. Well, my concern about the experimentation is that it's reminiscent of the free banking era. And when you have lots and lots of currencies competing, it can be very good, but it can also be inherently inflationary itself, because you have an unlimited supply of money which have only a limited set of resources. And so
Sure.
we need to have, I think
So,
what you said before is focusing back on the resources and tying the money into that, and not just allowing people to make.
Exactly. So my point of view on that is that unemployment and not using these resources and not generating more resources is much more harmful than inflation. And we don't necessarily want a 2% inflation always. That's not necessarily always the best policy. It's just been how we've done things. And so really, and also it's like we still will have the federal currency. We still have other currencies we can use. And it's not like your little city's currency that helps people exchange and use the resources that they have at their disposal and create employment, even employment just like helping out and getting paid for that. It's not like adding these currencies alongside that help people get resources is necessarily going to create a giant inflationary bubble. And if it does create inflation, well, then we respond to it. That is about this looking at how we respond to it, having discussions, creating consensus, because we have a lot of tools like Demirage that we can run very easily now with digital currencies.
We're going to move on now to our final talk of the conference here in person. Kai, do you want to hand that lapel over to Bella?
Okay.
So thank you very much for that. We'll only be a couple of seconds and I'll explain how we're going to run this last talk.